Hi, well, good afternoon and welcome to the CCSQ Data Analytics Spring 2024 Data Camp. My name is Julie Amdy and I'll be facilitating over the next 2 days. Oh, sorry, my deck's a little glitchy here. So I'm going to be facilitating over the next 2 days. The Spring Data Camp's a 2-day event that will be filled with multiple sessions designed to educate those in our community and others interested in data and analytics. I'm going to kick things off first with a video that will give us some additional information about our event.
Welcome everyone to the 2024 Spring Data Camp, a multi-session, multi-day event focused on educating the CCSQ Data and Analytics user community. During this data camp, we will be exploring sessions on the SaaS via transition, Databricks, QuickSight, and the CCSQ Data and Analytics portal. We will conclude the Spring 2024 Data Camp with a session centered around the CCSQ's future vision for the roadmap. Before we get started, let's review some logistical information about the event and our sessions. There is a Confluence page solely dedicated to this event, where you can find the schedule for both days and the session summaries. You may access this page within your meeting invite. We are also recording every session and will make the recording and session materials available on Confluence shortly after the event. A Q&A will be held at the end of each session. To submit a question for these Q&As, use the Zoom chat feature. We ask that you stay on mute to minimize background noise and keep us on schedule. Also, please refrain from sharing your video camera to reduce distractions. Lastly, time permitting, short breaks will be held between sessions, right after the Q&As. There is one Zoom link for the entire event, allowing you to be able to jump in and out in order to best accommodate your schedule. Thank you for joining us. Stay tuned for the agenda.
Okay, so let's move into today's agenda. To kick things off today, we have CCSQ DNA Leadership Introduction with Ken Howard, Dr. Jennifer Rockel, Rebecca Rothbard, and Grant Hughes from 1 o'clock to 2 o'clock p.m. Eastern Time. In session 2, we have Code Conversion and Best Practices with Derek Cruikshank from 2 o'clock to 3 o'clock p.m. Eastern Time. Our third session today is going to be our demo on Public Portal by Mary Mabara from 3 o'clock to 3:30 p.m. Eastern Time. Our fourth session today is Python for SaaS Programmers with Colton Rathie from 3:30 to 4:15 p.m. And then finally, we'll be rounding out day 1 with our fifth session, R for SaaS Programmers with Dan Anderson from 4:15 to 5 p.m. So then looking at tomorrow we'll be kicking things off with CCSQ QuickSight Data Visualization presented by Sarah Davis at 1 p.m. to 2 p.m. Eastern Time. Our second session will be Qualitative Analytics Capabilities using NLP with Nikhil from 2 to 3 p.m. Our third session will be A Day in the Life of a Claim with Gennady Sherman from 3 to 4 p.m. Eastern Time. And then finally, our fourth and final session on the last day of Data Camp and to round out our event is CCSQ DNA Roadmap and Vision with Ken Howard, Alicia Hudson, Justina Sardin from 4 to 5 p.m. Eastern Time. So as a reminder, some of our sessions, so looking back at our last slide here, some of our sessions, 3 of the ones today, do include Databricks notebooks and then one of our one tomorrow. Prior to each session and then at the start of each session, we will be dropping the specific link for those notebooks in the chat. But Laura is going to put in the chat now, our Zoom chat, the link to the folder to access all of them if you want to open them up and look at any of them prior to the events and have them ready for that specific session. Okay, so with that, we are going to move over to session 1, which is CCSQ DNA Leadership Introduction. Just a quick reminder for this session, because it is our introductory session, we do not have a Q&A portion. This is the only session that will work that way just because it is kicking us off. But again, Ken will be presenting again tomorrow afternoon for our Roadmap and Vision session, and will be available to answer any questions at that time. So we're going to start things off with our monthly satisfaction survey. This survey helps us to know how we can improve your experience within the CCSQ DNA environment in our community. This survey is typically given during our monthly town hall meetings, but because we did not have a town hall meeting in May and we had this great event instead, we're going to be administering it now. Just a few reminders to get us started here though. We will review our April and May survey results at the June town hall meeting. We're not going to take the time to go over those right now, but we will be including both of them on our June 26th meeting. So look out for that. Please only submit a survey if you are a user of the CCSQ DNA environment. In a moment, the Zoom poll will pop up on your screen. You're going to have about 5 to 6 minutes to answer those questions. Just kind of how our results are trickling in. I'll keep an eye on that. Please remember to scroll down and look through all of the questions so you don't miss any, and only complete those questions relevant to you. If it's a short answer, just put an NA if it doesn't apply to you, and then hit submit to lock in your answers. After 5 to 6 minutes is ended, the poll will close, and just a reminder that those results will be used to help us improve our tools, trainings, and offerings. And again, we'll be going over them in June. Okay, so with that, I'm going to go ahead and launch the poll. It should be on your screen in just a minute. We are a minute in now, a minute and 30 seconds, so we'll have about 2.5, 3 minutes left. We're about halfway through our survey time. Just a reminder, please scroll all the way down to make sure you're not missing any questions. It looks like most of our survey participants are complete, but we still do have a few stragglers, so take another minute to wrap up. Take 30 more seconds. Ten more seconds. Thank you so much for your participation. Okay, so next we are going to be passing things over to our first session speaker to officially kick things off. So our first presenter will be Ken Howard, the Director of DQSGED within CCSQ. So Ken, I will pass things over to you now.
What a handsome double that picture is. I should meet him. Good afternoon, all. I want to welcome you to the Spring Data Camp, and hopefully we get a lot of great participation out of it. You get a lot of information out of it, identify any assistance and everything. So if you can move the next slide for me. So I'm just going to do quick introductions. I will talk probably in detail about a bulk of this at our exit session. So please participate in that if you're not planning on. I'll try and get a little bit more granular in detail and set expectations at that exit. But as far as introduction, again, welcome. It's a good turnout. I'm seeing over 300 people on the call right now. I think that's exceptional. And I'm sure it will grow over the next short period of time. Just for informational, our CDR, those of you who have been with us for a couple of years have seen it grow significantly over the past 5 years. We're adding new tools to the environment. We're getting new validations, new data sets, and a lot more participants within the CDR going forward. So to me, that's a positive outcome. We've, over the past, I'd say, year and a half, the stability of the environment has improved greatly. I'm sure some of you may feel that's not true, but it has statistically. Better partnerships that we've grown within the CMS and externally about what data is available, how we can better exchange data, et cetera, and more to come on that. We are always improving our data relationships with the other CMS components. And as a focus that is of great interest, as it has been commonly shared for over a year now, it is our target architecture to move off our complete dependency of SAS VIA towards more modern, and that's in quotes, right? So more modern tool sets, more available and diverse skill sets needed for analytics, industry-wide analytics and standards. Such as using R, Python, SQL, PySpark, things along that are more generic in nature and transferable skill sets, as opposed to, you can do it any way you want as long as it's in SAS. So I want you all to hear that. You will hear it multiple times from me, probably the rest of my team. A lot of the focus of this data camp is going to be on this particular topic and identifying your unique needs. Organization, every deliverable, every group has kind of a difference. Discovering that. What is needed to make sure that your teams can be successful going forward. Next slide, please. So here's a general philosophy that we have coming. Again, this is nothing new, but it is the main theme probably for a year to year and a half coming up, is to come to the data. What is this? What does it mean to you? So it is important for everyone to realize, understanding how CMS's and CCSQ's data is used, for what reasons, what program objectives, what is valuable, what is not, from just raw analytics, is value in and of itself, right? Is to make sure your deliverables, the consistency of information is where it needs to be. We don't know that if we don't know who and how their data is being used. We don't know how to improve that environment unless we know how our data is being used. And the only way to do that is for you to leverage it from our environment for us to see how it's being used. So that's one major drive for it. And then that in turn provides feedback to our program partners in order to provide information, statistics, and real metrics and evaluations on what program improvements might need to actually occur in order to support their business goals. So we get a win-win out of that from a CMS perspective. We can see what deliverables and reports and dashboards are used and which are not, whether it's worth maintaining, as opposed to, generally doing an email distribution. So to, for example, that's why come to the data using standardized tools, standardized delivery methods for those, solutions is important for us to move towards. But in order to accomplish that, we recognize we need to, as we understand your business deliverables and needs, is to make sure the right tools are in a toolbox. That doesn't mean your specific tools. That means tools that meet the business need of what you're putting together. And we are discovering that we are actively adding new tools now. We are discovering as we engage with you all to make sure the right solutions are in place for you to be successful. As a big date, again, will be a main focus of the data camp, is the SAS decommissioning, right? So as everyone may or may not know, we are currently running SAS via 3.5 within our environment. SAS has announced that they are discontinuing support of that product in February of 2025. We CMS, we CCSQ are planning on having extended support on that product through the end of December 25. So that is a date everybody should write down. Everybody should look at working towards in any type of impact to your programs, into your deliverables, into your specific contracts. You should make note of that, because if we need to engage with you about your contractual impact, which I know one of my staff members, Justina, is actively reaching out to every organization to figure out what you uniquely need. Some people need contract mods, some people need assistance in recoding, some people need various things in order for you to be successful. We need to discover that now. That is important for that outreach and for all teams to be very proactive in identification of your need to move from a SaaS-dependent world to a non-SaaS-dependent world. So that is an important bullet right there. So I'll address that question at the end of this. But so SaaS migration support kind of tied into what I just said. We want to make sure that every organization's unique need is addressed, right? So that we have the proper resources in place to facilitate your move to a non-SaaS world. And we want to expand this community. We want to make peering available, common code segments and sharing as the community produces it. We want some type of, for lack of a better term, a community of practice that we might be able to work together in seeing what is needed for the community instead of us addressing it behind the scenes, behind the curtain, and making sure we're dealing with individuals, or make sure we deal with the community instead of individuals. I want to address the SaaS. I saw a couple SaaS questions pop up real quick. So just for us to address here, no. So SaaS decommissioning, again, the date is accurate, December of 2025. The SaaS website has the decommissioning of SaaS as February of 2025. We will buy extended support and maintain the current SaaS via 3.5 environment through the end of December of 2025. Again, various organizations have different levels of effort about what code or what needs to be converted or rebuilt or whatever the case may be within the environment. Were the other questions similar nature? And SAS VIA completely goes away December 31st, 2025. That's the date that everybody should make note of. So just so everybody's on the same page, as of today, that is the date we plan to decommission the SAS VIA environment. We do have the other toolings, Databricks, available for consumption to use R, Python, SQL, et cetera, for you all to recode, rebuild what you need to do. I'll talk at the exit about tools we're bringing to the table about conversion as well to assist the community in the rewrite of code where necessary. And I think that's it for that. Next slide, please. So here's, we have recently stood up a portal. Everybody probably should, again, bookmark the page. There it is on this slide, is for everybody to look at. That will be consistently updated with new content, from news and information to training material recommendations for communities. It will have additional functionality in the future about data sharing and publication, as well as a central access point to all our analytic tools, from SAS to Databricks to QuickSight and other, right? So this will be kind of the central authority for content related to data and analytics from a CCSQ perspective. We are implementing tool sets coming along for data publication and contributors. Every one of you creates some subset of data that be relevant to somebody else. We want to see if we can get better at making those data sets available in context and those things available. So it's not done 10 times, it's done once and shared with the community, right? That's an ideal goal. We may not ever get there, but we should try for it, right? To see what we can do to provide best value as an enterprise and a community, and not just individuals within the environment. And again, as I mentioned, training content will be constantly updated here from this date going forward. So we can make sure we're pointing you all to training and content that is relevant to how it is applied to our environment, not just generic industry training modules that you can Google yourself today, right? That's your responsibility. We want to make things that are relevant to our environment.
And then I just want to mention that I did put that link in the chat for everyone as well.
Oh, thank you very much, Julia. So some major areas that I want to, well, again, I'll talk in detail at the last session, but AI is a huge focus for the next year. And that falls into three major portfolio areas: LLM, generative models that we want to support and expand to the community; that machine learning capabilities, we are already implementing some scale of that on the back end system with some of our operational needs, and get predictive analytics around our operational environments. We have assistive technologies and low code and no code solutions that we're looking at implementing to, again, bring more tools to the table to help our community, because different teams have different skill sets and different levels of expertise and complexity of the deliverables that they have to do. So we're trying to bring tool sets to the entirety of the community here and get best value for what we're doing. Data visualization, right? Databricks has native capabilities for visualization. We want to bring standards and information around that. We want to present QuickSight and, again, pilot and evaluate the use of QuickSight Q, which is a fairly new product from Amazon that brings a little bit better AI analytics and generative capabilities to QuickSight. Again, change the way we do information reporting and deliverables. That's the whole goal of this, is to get out of the spreadsheets and an email and blasting it out to 10,000 people, but to make a dashboard available, and we can see who's clicking what, when, in order to see the value out of the reports and deliverables that we have. So all these things are evaluations that are, again, planned now through the next year. We're going to do a lot of these particular pilots, and successfully or not successfully, get lessons learned off of these things to see what value it brings to the community. We will be reaching out to our active community for any and all of those that may be interested in participating in evaluating some of this pilot material. So look for those opportunities, and I encourage you all to participate. So the more feedback we get, obviously, the better the deliverable ends up being from our perspective on what we give to the community as a tool in a toolbox. Next slide, please. Oh, we're on to the next one. So I want to, again, thank you all for attending. If there's any questions, we'll answer it in chat as best we can. If not, feel free to reach out and ask as you need. Thank you.
And then just a reminder, both for any questions in the chat now, but in addition, questions that we get throughout Data Camp, Some of our sessions or our presenters may go close to the end of our presentation time, and because we are on such a tight schedule, if we don't get a huge Q&A portion, or for this one because we are getting some trickling in here, we're going to make sure to get all of those questions over to presenters after our event, and then presenters will be helping us to come up with some answers, and then we'll publish those and put those on our public Confluence space. That way they're accessible after the event, and not only the people who ask them, but then everyone can view them as well. So thank you so much to Ken. We are going to move things over now to our DVA team for some testimonials. We have Dr. Jennifer Rockwell, Rebecca Rothbard, and Grant Hughes, who are going to be presenting today. And each of them are going to be giving you some additional information about their background, and then in addition to their testimonial. So first we have Jennifer. I will pass things over to you.
Thank you. Can you hear me well?
Loud and clear.
Great. Okay. So yes, hi everyone. I'm Jennifer Rockwell and I work on the DVA, or the Data Validation and Administrative Support contract. I'm guessing the DVA could be similar to other contractors in that we have analysts with a varying range of experience with different software and programming languages. At the DVA, we have folks who are expert in SAS, but with little or no experience with R or Python. And we have some folks who have a great deal of experience with R and or Python. So the three of us presenting this morning from the DVA represent analysts at some different points on that spectrum. And we're starting with me. So here's me. I used Stata in college. I have at least 15 years experience using SAS, but I haven't used Python until about a month ago. I've never used R, and that maybe shows how long it's been since I've been out of college. I've only recently begun getting into Notebook. When we first moved to SAS Fire on the CDR, we realized fairly early on that due to the size of the data sets that we are processing, it was necessary to use HiveQL. So if you could go to the next slide. Thank you. We process data at the national level. SAS data steps just took too long to run. To be more efficient, we wanted to take advantage of partitioning, and these large data sets weren't suitable to process using CAS due to how long it would take to load those large tables into memory. So much of our programs are written in SQL. Here on this slide, for a very simplified example I've got the evolution of some simple code starting with a SAS data step and then moving that to processing in HiveQL in the second section there. When the move to Databricks was announced, we realized we were in a pretty good spot for tweaking our HiveQL code in SAS Fire so that we could connect to Databricks. For many things, we only had to make relatively minor tweaks to our existing programs for them to continue to run, like in the third example there. Now we are facing the move away from SAS Fire to directly work in Databricks Notebook. To be frank, when I first heard about this, I was pretty dismayed because much of the talk around coding in Databricks seemed to be around using R and Python languages, and never having used either of those languages, the thought of that transition was, and it can be pretty overwhelming. But I was told that SQL can also be used. And so in the last few weeks, I have been playing around in Notebook and realized that my SQL code runs pretty well. I've been able to transition one of my measures completely over to run in Notebook, and that feels pretty good. If we just move to the next slide. I'll say it's encouraging to know that at the minimum, I can use SQL to get most of the things I need to get done. And I can mix and match. There'll be some things that work better in Python, but I hope to learn those things piece by piece over the next few months. What I really hope to learn more is how to interact with data to and from our workbench space, and I believe that resources are out there or are coming to help with that. I will say sharing knowledge across our team has been really helpful. I'm going to pass you on to Rebecca Rothbard. She's been a great resource to me, shared some really good chunks of code that I can play with, and this has diminished much of my anxiety. I'm also sure I'm going to learn a lot at this data camp and from all the other resources that are being made available to us. So one last thing before I hand to Rebecca, for someone who's like me, where change is hard, I would recommend getting into notebooks sooner rather than later, especially if you know only SAS. Play around, start with small tasks, and then you can build on them. So good luck. I'll pass this on to Rebecca.
Thank you, Jenny. As she said, my name is Rebecca. I have over 15 years of SAS programming experience. Most of that has been as an analyst in the QuickQIO program over the course of 3 contract cycles. As I think Julia mentioned, or maybe on our intro slide, my current contract is the data validation and administrative support contract. In all honesty, I barely know R. I probably should put 0 there. I have about 4 years of experience with Python. And like most folks, I'm a Databricks compute cluster and notebook beginner. Next slide, please, Julia. So I grew up skiing, and my experience with the various analytic systems over the years has felt a lot like skiing. There's been a lot of wipeouts, and there's definitely been some bottlenecks and frustration. Next slide, please. So every contract that I've worked on has included a reporting component, probably similar to other folks. Usually that's come in the form of an Excel document. Initially, we relied on SAS Desktop to produce CSVs and XLSX files using proc export. I think everybody's probably pretty familiar with that, feels good with that. Eventually, we needed to customize our reports, so we started using ODS and DDE. Eventually, the contract I was working on moved away from SAS Desktop and into SAS Via. I think folks probably remember that transition. That was pretty challenging. At the same time, we had a need to produce a macro-enabled Excel report. SAS Via didn't really meet our needs at that time, so we chose Jupyter Notebook as our platform. Jupyter worked, but we found it lacked certain features such as system integration and user collaboration, both of which I've come to learn are standard features in Notebook, Databricks Notebook, that is. Speaking of, we got access to Notebook in 2023. I think most folks did as well. And our group decided that moving our reporting deliverables to that platform would really help create a lot of efficiencies in our general workflows and reduce any likelihood of errors. I think that's definitely a big tenet of our work. We now use Notebook to produce a multi-tabbed Excel report using large amounts of data that's stored within the CDR. We can just push and pull, and it's very easy. Next slide, please. So here's just a small snippet of my reporting program that I've got in Notebook. As you can see, Notebook allows users to set macro variables very similar to SAS. So I can set them at the top of my program and then use them throughout. Next slide, please. Notebook also allows users to some degree, replicate SAS macro programming. And this has been really critical for our work, being a member of the DVA and who and what we work with. We have to report for all states and all QUINs. So macro programming is really important. Next slide, please. So for the report that I mentioned, we have used 2 main libraries, Pandas and XLSX Writer. Pandas is fundamental to Python programming and a library that almost everybody's going to use at some point. It's incredibly important and useful. It's already been installed in our environment, and no one needs to install, but folks do need to import. A nice feature of Notebook that I've come to learn is something called write sidebar actions, and I've got that on my screen here. The library's action icon allows, will display the libraries that have been installed as part of the build, kind of like default stuff. Pandas is one example, and it also will display things that have been installed by the user. So for instance, XLSX Writer. Next slide, please. So for me, in moving into Notebook for reporting and analysis purposes, it was really important to understand the differences between SAS and Python. I really rely on my understanding of SAS as a way to contextualize Python and to help further my proficiency in the language. I've had to understand the relationship between Notebook and the tables stored on Workbench, as well as those in our project-specific database. The DNA team has been a great resource for this level of understanding. I've also had to learn and understand DB utils, which is a really important thing. I think that might be a topic later on in Data Camp, but that basically provides tools to utilize within the Notebook file system. Again, this was something that the DNA team was super helpful with. Next slide, please. So in conclusion, with support from my amazing colleagues, as well as the folks on the DNA team who are so great, I feel more confident in using Notebook. And in all honesty, I prefer it to SAS for many tasks, including reporting. I think it's awesome. So I will now turn it over to my colleague, Grant Hughes, so he can talk about his experience. Grant.
Thanks, Rebecca. I'm going to go ahead and go to the next slide as well. Similar to Rebecca and Jenny, I've got about 20 years of SAS experience, mostly in the quality improvement environment. I was with the VA in their surgical quality improvement for a few years. And then in grad school, I worked mostly in R and have about 3 or 4 years of research and manuscript-based R programming. Most of my Python experience up until Databricks had been limited to hobby projects and automation scripts. And it wasn't really until spring of 2023, I think we first got access to Databricks in April. We really first started using it when we had a launch meeting at the end of June with CCSQ team. And one of the first things we noticed, and go ahead and go to the next slide, please, was how quick everything moved. The data read-ins and just data prints, just doing simple SQL queries in the Databricks notebook environment was incredibly fast. There was certain things like querying BIC or querying NCH data that you wouldn't even consider doing in SAS because it would take so long, that would run really fast. So I have just a quick example code where I am querying the inpatient NCH Part A data, which is a massive table that you wouldn't even consider running a proc freak on in SAS. And this code runs and looks at how many there are with missing dates grouped by month, and it takes 6 minutes to run. This would have sat spinning for probably 10 hours in SAS and never worked. And so we initially saw this and just saw how quickly it worked and started doing just simple things like mimicking proc freaks, looking at data, being able to visualize data a lot quicker. Next slide, please. There was also the new connection with SAS and the use DBX option. And again, we were beta testing, so we started just testing running small selections of that Hive SQL blocks. We were a little unfortunate with the DVA in that we had most of our code was already running in Hive SQL because we deal with such large data sets that we had to it. And we noticed that we were reducing processing time, by up to a third by converting just 1 of 10 blocks in our programs from running in, the Ambari cluster to running on the DBX cluster. We also, through that, discovered 9 specific items that had to be changed. These were simple things like the DBX cluster's inability to handle a date being pushed to it and having to, convert it beforehand or convert it after, changes to macro variables, things that needed to be changed in your SAS code to run on the DBX cluster. It wasn't really until July that we fully converted a program, and I'd actually gone skiing in Chile and came back and realized that we needed to convert everything from the Ambari cluster to run the Databricks cluster. And the first program I fully converted went from being 4 hours to running only in 15 minutes. So it was really an amazing time savings. And just for example, for this particular program, which was one of our measures that had 40 plus periods, if we ran all the time periods, it would take about 7 days in Ambari to rerun everything and only about 10 hours on the Databricks cluster. So we saw a huge impact there. Next slide, please. And so in addition to the just speed and using the Databricks cluster, in Databricks Notebook, we started looking at, was there a way we could use SQL outer joins to replace proc compare and allow us to compare some of these large data sets that we could never use SAS proc compare for, simply because it was too long and would take too long. One of my coworkers, Mac DeLay with Telegen, shared that this data compy package he had found, and it basically does proc compare using outer joins, but gives a pretty clean output that looks similar to what we've seen before. So I implemented it into our Quinn dataset delivery program, which is one that I used to run. I'd run it on Friday as I was leaving and hope that it ran over the weekend and that I would have comparisons of all 450 data sets. Now I can run all those comparisons in about 2 hours. Next slide, please. And so this is just an example because I like to share code. I'm not going to go through it, but it shows kind of how the syntax of this data compy, which is a Python-based comparison program. And it's pretty easy. It gives some good output. It's easy to look at your mismatches or any rows that are not found in multiple columns or multiple tables. Go ahead and go next slide, please. So those were kind of the first two things that we did right away, was converting programs and finding huge improvements in efficiencies. But that was using the SAS Databricks cluster. And then these data compis were using Databricks Notebook to can do proc compares that we hadn't done before. In July, Rebecca and I also started converting an ETL process that we had run previously, and it was all Python based. So we only partially understood it, Rebecca and I both being, fairly limited in our Python experience. And it was run on an old Unix cluster using Unix command line, and there was over 30 Python scripts. And we wanted to convert this to all run in Databricks Notebook. In the previous runs, it takes about 5 to 7 days. And the only thing we could really do was compare row counts because, again, they were really large data sets. And there was no way to run a proc compare on everything. We always had to go back and remember how to use Unix editors from 10 or 15 years ago when we were working in Unix command lines. So it was always a once a month memory of what the correct keystrokes were for using things like Unix Editor or BI. Next slide, please. So thanks to the Databricks Notebook, we were able to convert everything into that. We use data compy, and we now can actually compare every single row. We can compare every database data table that comes out of this ETL process. We've reduced processing times to 2 to 4 days. We simplified it from over 30 to only 17 Databricks notebooks. And then we also created an additional 9 new ones that QA the process along the way so that we don't just wait till the end and hope everything worked. We can now check as we're going. We recently converted this to a workflow, and eventually that'll run on the dedicated job cluster. So when we run this process, it won't use any resources from our primary cluster. And in terms of a cost savings, I think job clusters for Databricks units are about a quarter of the cost. So once we are able to run those on job clusters, will also be faster, more reliable, and cheaper, which is kind of what everybody wants, right? Next slide. So in conclusion, it's definitely been challenging. That ETL process, Rebecca and I were working 6-7 days a week and 60 to 80 hours a lot of weeks. I went to a conference during that time and would, between sessions, be running back and forth to my laptop trying to write code and work on things. But it's resulted in a massive savings in both cost, production time, and a much improvement in all of our programs and processes. The communication and work within our team has been critical. We still, to this day, do weekly PyBites where we share Python lessons and code to try to help educate everybody. Lots of challenges still ahead, as Rebecca's been kind of tackling report generation. And as she said, finding, improvements there in both reliability as well as processing speed. We haven't done a whole lot of more complex statistical processes yet. For example, Glimix and some of the other complicated statistical procs in SAS. We have not gotten to the point where we've replicated those. We have done a little bit of machine learning, and once the R cluster comes online and is able to actually access the AWS database, we look forward to being able to integrate some R processes in as well. And that is all I have. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Okay, so at this point, that wraps up our session. Thank you so much to the DVA team for your testimonials, as well as Ken for presenting today. Our next presentation is going to be Code Conversion Best Practices, presented by Derek Cruikshank from 2 o'clock to 3 o'clock p.m. Eastern Time. Just a reminder, this session will use a Databricks notebook during the demo portion. Laura's going to drop that link in the Zoom chat so you can access it prior to the start of the session, but then again, we'll also be dropping it in the chat at the start of the session in the event that you don't have time and you need to use this time for a break. So we are going to be taking a break for the next 12 minutes until we get to 2 p.m. And then at that point at 2 p.m., we'll be starting our next session. So thank you so much for joining us. We appreciate it, and we'll see you back for Code Conversion Best Practices.